easy to point fingers at somebody. Like, it's human nature. We usually only remember things or mark something as significant when we find an opportunity to position ourselves as the protagonist in a story, right? Not that we ever really position ourselves as the antagonist, right? Like, people rarely tell stories where they were the bad person, right? Like, if you think about it, and even if you like think about the way that you tell your stories to other people, you usually always talk about how this person did something to you, how they did something really fucked up to you, how somebody betrayed you, backstabs you, or someone just did shitty things. Like, you are always like the victim, right? And so in those cases, you are usually just making the other person look really bad. Now, this is not to discredit your story or discredit your side or discredit your feelings about what happened, your discredit your truth, right? In the midst of you telling the story, you might maybe like throw words around here, like calling somebody a narcissist and things like that, and point fingers, right? You want people on your side. You want people to support you. And you might even find people who can relate to your story. So, right, we are always living in the story where like people do this to us and do that to us, right? I don't really see people talking about how they have hurt other people, right? Like, you have to really think about this, right? Yes, we do find other people's stories whom we can relate to, in which like majority of the times it's a case where somebody else did something to them, like, and then we relate the story. It's like, oh, it's, my friend has done that same thing to me. Oh, my family did the same thing. Oh yeah, my boyfriend did the same thing. You see, like, you're always finding people that you can relate to in a way that you were also a victim to a certain story where you were a protagonist, right? You're this pure person that you just got something done to you. This is a common way that people tell their stories, and the way that you also keep the story as a narrative in your head, right? So everybody else that hurts your feelings is like a narcissist, a bad person, right? Like, we demonize people who hurt our feelings, but rarely do we actually think about the way that we hurt other people, right? Now, again, I don't know if I already said this, but this is not to discredit the way that you experience pain, right? So obviously, things left a remark in your memory and it really hurt your feelings. So it stays with you. So you left a trauma, it left a really bad taste in your mouth. And sometimes it takes a really long time to recover from that. And it may never recover. You may never recover from those bad memories and experiences. But the reason why I'm talking about this is that while it's very convenient and easy for us to point fingers at people in the way that have hurt us and even calling them these things, right? Like, we throw words around these days all the time, like narcissist. Like, everyone's narcissist these days. Now, there's like clinically, it's a clinical term actually. Like, there is a thing as like narcissistic personality disorder. Like, people actually get diagnosed as a narcissist, right? But what if, right? What if we all have the capabilities of being a narcissist? Like, let's look at that as an adjective. I believe that everyone has the capacity and capabilities of being narcissistic because it's a trait, because it's a characteristic. It's not really like, yes, it is a diagnosis, but I think it can also be expressed and used as like a trait. And I think that everyone can be narcissistic. So this means that while it might be very convenient for us to really demonize the terminology and demonize people and associate people whose traits that we don't like seeing, especially if we think that someone's really egotistical, very egocentric and selfish, especially if they did something that was harmful to you, whether that was intentional or unintentional or by accident, right? You might call that person narcissistic, fake, all these things, right? But let's stick with let's stick with one terminology here. Let's stick with the term narcissistic. What about you? Can you actually look at yourself and maybe think about the times that you might have been narcissistic to other people? And again, this has nothing to do with your intention. You could very much believe that you are a good person, but you think about it, right? I already mentioned this, but we only really remember the times that we were the victim in situations. We only remember the moments and we really keep them with us. We really bring those memories with us in our memory where we were the victim. And right, those are the traumas that we take with us, and those are the traumas that our body keeps in ourselves, and we really victimize ourselves. And unless we heal from those memories and traumas, we actually become like those who abused us. But that's a whole different topic. But we're sticking, the topic that we're discussing here is the fact that you, like, being cognizant of the fact that you are capable of being narcissistic as well. You probably just don't remember it as much. You probably don't think about it as much because you're always thinking about yourself. Like, I will say, well, I can even speak for myself. I can say that I probably have been narcissistic. Again, this is not the same thing as you being an actual narcissist. You could be a compassionate person. You could be a very, like, kind-hearted, good-hearted, pure-hearted person, but still have narcissistic traits. I believe it's actually, like, human nature to be narcissistic sometimes. And, you know, again, people throw that word around everywhere. But let's look at the actual definition of narcissistic. One second. Let's look at the actual dictionary definitions of narcissist, because people throw this term around and, like, kind of use this interchangeably. Okay, so the dictionary definition on Google is having an excessive or erotic interest in oneself and one's physical appearance, right? The similar terms are vain, self-absorbed, self-obsessed, conceited, self-centered, egocentric, but that's not really how we use this. Because this kind of sounds like someone who's, like, just vain and shallow. But when we use this term, it's, like, oftentimes associated with someone who is, like, emotionally abusive, emotionally manipulative, who's selfish, right? So there's more nuance to that term besides just someone being, like, self-obsessed, right? Which, by the way, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with being self-obsessed if it's just based on self-love, right? There's levels to this shit, right, guys? But anyways, I'm really trying to stay on the topic here. So, acknowledging the fact that you probably have the full capacity and capabilities of being narcissistic to other people, and really looking in the mirror and ask yourself, have I treated other people poorly? Because maybe I was being reactive to something, or maybe I was just being, like, inconsiderate. Maybe I just wasn't being sensitive to the situation, and you might have been cold. Like, I think it's actually easier to come off narcissistic. Like, I think narcissistic can also be a result of being ignorant, and you kind of thinking that, you know, like, you can mean well, right, and still come off very narcissistic, you know. But oftentimes this trait is expressed when someone is in a defensive mode. You know, when someone, and that's the thing, narcissistic it's inherently, like, coming from the place of an ego, right? And what does the ego do? The ego is always trying to protect the person. The ego is reactive. The ego is always in self-defense mode. It's protective. So anything that you, for example, in this context where, let's say, you receive something to be a threat to your self-concept or your safety, and you react, maybe, and by the way, that threat doesn't have to be an actual threat. Sometimes it's a perceived threat, right? Which sometimes often is, like, a result of you being triggered by something that you perceive as a threat, because maybe it, like, yeah, I think I'm repeating myself there. It's triggering something that your roots of your pain, and maybe something that looks similar to what usually triggers you, it still was perceived as a threat, and therefore you're going to give it a reaction from the place of, like, your core wound. Does that make sense? And, like, you see here, this is where you might give a very narcissistic response out of that self-defense mode. You didn't really mean to be narcissistic. You didn't mean to be, like, cold-hearted or come off like an asshole. But because you are in a self-preservation / self-defense mode, you maybe, like, give a very narcissistic answer or response to somebody, right? Again, you could call it, like, a reaction, right? Oftentimes, the way we act, a lot of times it is a reaction to someone's action or a situation. Again, most of the time it's a reaction to a perceived threat. Because if we're sensitive about like protecting ourselves, then we probably are more likely to give narcissistic responses to our surroundings. And people really don't think about this. You have to actually catch yourself, not even in the, actually not in the act. You might not be able to catch yourself in the act. Why? Because oftentimes we react out of emotion, and when we're in a heightened emotional state, we're not rational. We are not really logical. We're not sensible, so we're not able to actually like check ourselves that well, clearly. But this is something you actually have to think about. This is why healing is so important, guys. Your healing is not so that you heal your wounds, but it's so that you can become self-aware, so that you don't inflict that pain on other people, based on your projection or based on your assumptions, but also based on your own triggers. And hence it might trigger you more. Like if you don't really properly take care of yourself and your initial wounds, you're going to inflict more pain on yourself, because your perception is going to be based on like your triggers, which is not the best for you, like having the best reality that is aimed for your safety and feeling of like security and peace. So but again, that's also a separate topic here, but right. So I think what I'm trying to say here is, before you like go around and point fingers at people being narcissistic, consider the fact that you might be a narcissist too. Again, I'm being very loose and casual with this term. Rather, I'm not talking about the actual clinical diagnosis. We're not going around diagnosing people. But because now that we have adapted this term into our daily life, and like we describe people's behaviors as narcissistic, and we call people narcissists because their behaviors are narcissistic, correct? And so, these are our ways of like recognizing a narcissistic behavior. But I want you to be able to recognize the same trait in yourself. Like, I know for a fact that I can be narcissistic with sometimes my responses, and I know for a fact that I think I have a tendency to. Well, I know like in the very recent time that I gave some. This is the thing. It wasn't a narcissistic response, but it was a snarky response, because my feelings were hurt based on a perceived offense. Again, the offense, it doesn't always mean that the other person is attacking you, but it's a perceived offense, right? But I actually caught that, and me and my friend, so this happened around New Year time, I actually like owned up to it, because I like, what's funny, because I actually called my friend narcissistic, but in that moment where I was calling my friend narcissistic, I feel like I was being narcissistic, because like I was trying to make them feel bad based on how they made me feel. But I feel like I overreacted, which I realized after the fact. But this is the thing. This is what we do. This is what humans do, guys. Like, this is why we have to catch ourselves, instead of like pointing fingers, and instead of only like looking at why they do this to us, like only considering our feelings. We have to start looking at other people's feelings as well. And this is, and I'm not saying you have to practice this with every stranger on the internet, especially, because that is not your responsibility. That's too much work, right? So being realistic. Like, let's be realistic and practical here, and start with like our inner circle. Well, I feel like for me, like, I know for a fact, like with my actual close relationships, I'm more I think, well, actually, I don't know. I might come off like a little cold, like maybe like aloof, and I have been told that I look, what's the word I'm looking for? Not snarky. What's the word I'm looking for? Snobby, like stuck up. I've gotten the feedback from people who don't know me, like from like strangers, like acquaintances. But I know, and my friends or my close circle people know that I'm actually very sensitive, and I'm like a soft heart. And I'm a softie with people, but that doesn't mean that I'm a saint. Like, sometimes I will get snarky, and I will, well, I don't do this all the time, but like, because I naturally am a very intense person, I know that I can definitely excuse me, I can definitely say things that are like not from my heart but from my ego, and I can definitely make a very like narcissistic comment, like completely out of line. Well, I don't say things out of line. Like I will never, like, because I, even during the times of like me feeling really like frustrated or angry, I still control my tongue, but I know like still the way that I might draft my reaction, it can be kind of like intense, like unnecessarily, which could be like a narcissistic response, right? Again, we're not talking about the actual clinical definition, but we're talking about like, you know what I'm talking about, like a narcissistic behavior or like trait. It has nothing to do with the person's heart or their true character. I'm saying that this is a trait that exists in everybody. Like, this is something that we all have. It's just not always expressed. It could be even like maybe described as a recessive gene almost. That's just my way of like making a funny expression here. It's, everybody has this. Not everyone expresses this, and even if people express this, it's not to the same degree, because some people might catch it, and some people might really own up to it, but at other times other people go to the extremes with this. So I think that so here's the thing: you don't have to be an actually clinically diagnosed narcissist to be a narcissist. You don't. Recognize that you always have the power to hurt people. That sounds wrong, because that's not power. That's not power. Hurting people is not power. But I'm saying that recognize that the influence that you have over people. Recognize the impact that you have over people with your words and your actions and your behaviors, your responses. Again, it is easy to be narcissistic when you're living in ego and when you're hurt. So it's not to dismiss how you feel. This is not to say you dismiss how you feel or diminish how you feel, because your story is valid. Your feelings are valid, but so are other people's. Again, we're talking about, our inner circle. But of course, if you're a generous person, you just take this kind of mentality with you everywhere you go, and you practice this with every stranger on the internet. This is sort of like, I guess, practicing kindness, but this is more than that, guys. I don't like that either. I don't like when people, man, I get this shit all the time on my TikTok sometimes. Like, I will just be in my own space, like talking about my own reality, like some story. And then like I have sometimes people coming to my comments, like telling me how to be, like trying to endorse kindness. It's like they're trying to convert me into a Christian. Like, I just hate when people like come into your territory. When I say territory, my TikTok, for example, my social media is my territory on my page. It's not like I go around to other people's pages and telling people how to be, how to act. If I'm talking shit, if I'm running my mouth on my own page sometimes, maybe I'm venting, maybe I'm like standing up for a group, like a marginalized group, but then, and maybe like my expression is maybe like a little too intense, and maybe somebody came in the comments and made some stupid ass comment, and I say something like snarky back to defend other people, position, or maybe defend. I'll give you a little story here. This is very random. But for example, right, a couple days ago, I posted this video just talking about like just me just having an existential crisis. It was a very, very dramatized TikTok. It was a TikTok. But once again, people always perceive things from their perception, right? So it's like people just recognize characteristics of a video, and they might relate to the feeling of it. It doesn't mean they actually know what I'm talking about from my intended purpose, from my reality, because people only perceive things from their own reality. Most of them, that's how most people do, right? That's why people always project. People always just assume, because they're receiving information from their depth of perception, right? So anyways, some comments that I received were like very like sensationalized. Well, they were assuming, and they were just leaving unsolicited comments, advice, telling me how to deal with this. So like I get annoyed by those things. So I left a comment and saying like, please do not leave unsolicited advice based on your assumptions. I'm just direct like that, right? It's my page once again. Now is that too over the top? I don't know. That's, again, this is not about that. You might think that, but again, it's my page. You guys already know that. Just keep shit real, okay? This is how I am. Because again, one thing about me also, I'm not one of those like people that act like I'm too good to not like say something. Like if I am irritated by something on my page, I'm going to say something, right? That's how I am. That's me though, right? And I never told anyone else to act like me or anything like that. And I never acted like I'm a saint, right? So anyways, somebody came into my comment section telling me to be kind. Like, right? That is, wait, where's this story going? So somebody telling me to be kind, and of course, like, that's like not of your business. Why are you in my comments? Like, why are you in my comments telling me to be kind when I'm just telling people not to make assumptions about my life, right? So that's just an example. Like, if you are that generous, angelic of a person, then go ahead and practice this type of kindness where you hold your tongue about everything on the internet, on your page, in the sake of practicing kindness. So if you're the kind of person, do that. I was just talking about how I'm not like that. So when I'm talking about like, so I think to those people who see me responding like that, to them I could come off narcissistic, right? So this is my example. You see, I'm very self-aware, where I'm able to see like where I could come off narcissistic to strangers, but to me, like, my reasons are like righteous. To me, that is just like, I think there's levels to this, right? Again, this goes back to people just having their own like perceptions about things, because most people just really just they just conflate a lot of things. People just don't really like think about different contexts, and they just think that the same behavior means the same thing across all kinds of contexts, right? People don't even think about like defending yourself or just standing up for yourself or just speaking your truth. Some people really think that just being kind means just generally kind to in every situation. Just keep your mouth shut. To me, that's not that doesn't do anything. That's not a beneficial thing at all. So, anyways, we'll talk about that another time. But so, you see this perception of like narcissistic, the trait of being narcissistic. We all have this, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that before you like point fingers and calling people narcissistic and even abusive, right? That's another prevalent term on the internet, calling people abusive. Again, what about you? Do you have the tendency to be abusive? You probably do. That's the thing, like, unless you check yourself and you see, abuse doesn't mean that you're like going around physically punching people in the face. Abusive is sometimes like psychological, right? Again, unless you really start looking at things objectively, unless you stop looking at yourself as the victim and like look at everyone else's position as well, like from objective view, while giving yourself the compassion that you deserve, then like it becomes much easier for us to be accountable for our own actions as well, because it's easier for us to justify our own actions and behaviors because we believe that we are the victim, and therefore other people who we perceive to be our abusers or our enemies, our opponents, we assume that, and we propose that they deserve to be mistreated or abused. So it's like we are making all kinds of justifications all the time because we see ourselves as victim, right? When we see ourselves as victim. But that's what I'm saying though. Doesn't that make you a hypocrite, right? If you're only like going around like pointing fingers at people and how they're narcissists, you're abusive, this and that, what about ourselves? What about ourselves? Like, if we only think about the way that we feel, if your feelings matter to you, other people's feelings matter too, right? But this is why you have to check yourself. Like, again, context is everything. Context is everything, right? I'm not talking about situations where someone's actually being like a piece of shit to you, like actually abusive, like an actual narcissist. We're not talking about those cases. I'm talking about just in general life situations where like you have to navigate in different kind of situations, like always have to like make sure you're not like out there projecting, you're not out there like assuming the worst from every single person. And it's sometimes hard when you are approaching life from a hurt position, which is why I'm like making it very clear, like, unless you are constantly checking yourself and your ego and like actually actively healing, you're likely going to inflict pain on other people as well, and also more pain on yourself because you're choosing to see life in only one way, because a lot of because a lot of things look the same from the outside, right? And when you are in a wounded position where you still have a lot of triggers you haven't properly healed or just dealt with, you project that onto every single person who displays the same behaviors but might have a completely different intention for you. So again, I'll give you an example for this. If you've been mistreated in the past by people, and let's say they were like really nice to you in the very beginning, but then it's like they turn their backs on you, like they do like 360. They turn into a completely different person after earning your trust, and they just abuse you, like verbally and psychologically, just do harm and just take away your peace. So maybe that's your experience in the past. So let's say you got away from that, and then you meet like new group of people, and now let's say you're trying to form close relationships, but then you have a hard time trusting people because it's like you're always like expecting your old pattern onto these people. And like, let's say you are now slowly trusting, but then in the new group of people, they're good so far, but then let's say they kind of showed like their human side, human side meaning like, in human relationships, like, and I say human relationships because I really want to emphasize like the real side of the relationship, the human relationships, like, and not in a glorified version like they talk about it in like spiritual community, because they talk about like, oh, once you're spiritual you get into conscious relationships, blah blah blah. It's not like that. But we'll talk about that another day. I feel like I brought up like so many different topics here that I'm going to talk about other days here. But look, right? And then you're going to get triggered because some of those like flaws now they're portraying to you, it's starting to look like your old pattern. You are now remembering, okay, now they had like my old group of friends who did this to me. Like I recognize this pattern where it's just slowly turning. So it's like you're projecting your past experiences onto the new group of people, right? That's my example. But there's no guarantee that it's the same, they're going to turn into the same people. So it's like you can't give people chances when you are like approaching your life from a place of the wounds and triggers. Okay? And then in your head it's like everybody is an abuser, everybody's out to get you, everyone's a narcissist. Okay? But then what about you? Are you like reacting to something, to a perceived threat, and calling everyone a narcissist before you get hurt? Right? That's just an example. So this is just in general, right? Like now this term has turned into this insult, which is unfortunate, honestly. But I think there's merit in just kind of admitting to the fact that we all can be narcissistic. We all have the tendency to be narcissistic, guys. That's the unfortunate side of humans, unfortunately, because when we get into our feelings, things get ugly. Humans are very vulnerable when our feelings get involved, and when our feelings get involved, that's when we kind of become irrational. And when we're hurting, especially when we experience rejection, we turn ugly, guys. Like, this. That's the downside of, well, I was gonna say downside of being human, but like what's the alternative, right? But this is something that we all gotta be aware of. Most people are always pointing fingers at people. What about you, right? You can break the pattern. Again, you do what you want to do, right? Especially like if you see yourself as a spiritual person, like people have different ways of practicing and embodying spirituality, but at least, right? Self-accountability. I think it's worth it to practice self-accountability. And yes, it hurts to break the pattern. It hurts to break the cycle. It hurts to give people chances. It really does. But I think if we make it less about other people and make it more about ourselves, because when we experience like narcissistic like abuse, yes, that leaves such a detrimental imprint on us. We can't really forget that. Yes, for sure. But that doesn't mean that the rest of your life has to be like that. And this is why, like, right, your triggers are like your gateway to healing, but it's a process. So this is not to say that you have to like fix yourself overnight, but at least recognize your own mindset. Recognize the way that you justify your own actions. So is it okay when you do it, but it's not okay when others do it, right? So just, you know, it's there's so much I could talk about here, right? Spiritual bypassing stuff. Like people think that like being on the spiritual path now means that you are a saint, that you are like angelic, you're better than people. But this is new age stuff. Like if you've been at this since day one, or like you come from a traditional practice, or like just self-defined spiritualist who just really is guided by the heart, or just spiriting, whatever your journey is, like unless you're like, following this new age bullshit like a cult, then you know what I'm talking about. This journey is not about like putting yourself above anyone, but really like you have to check yourself. Yes, checking yourself and being aware and being committed to your healing work doesn't really make life any easier, but at least like you need to at least like be accountable for how much you are inflicting things in your own life and allowing things in your own life. And this is not the same as saying that you're welcoming pain, that you are manifesting pain in your life. But listen very carefully. When you are committed to a certain perception of your life, then you are going to continue to receive the same thing. Not because it's actually objectively true, but that is your perception. Okay, does that make sense, guys? So once you're committed to seeing your life in a very specific way, that's the only way that you're going to see it. So that means is that you're not really allowing yourself the chances to experience life in a different way, because what is it? Your reality is your reality. But your perception of your reality and the narrative that you tell yourself in your own head is what really changes the game for you here, the way you experience your life. This is why it's a gift when you get to really like make it about yourself and make it your own journey instead of just pointing fingers at people, right? Yes, stand up for yourself. Yes, speak your feelings. Yes, speak your truth. Yes, own your feelings, but also like see yourself as well. You have just as much of a tendency to be a narcissist or be narcissistic. You have the ability, you have the influence, and you have the impact of hurting people too. Okay? You can't play saint just because you believe that you are the victim, or that you believe that you're a hero now. Now you got to go around like saving other people. You have just as much of an ability to hurt other people. So again, just being mindful of you on your own journey and where you're at mentally, and being accountable for possible projection, or not even projection, just like, people love to one thing people love to do when they don't really take accountability for the way they're shaping their reality is they kind of point fingers at everybody else. They go around, judge and condemn people for their own journey instead of like looking at themselves. Okay, looking at yourself is a difficult thing sometimes, but it's worth it. So yeah, assume that you're narcissistic too until proven otherwise. And that's consistent work that you're gonna have to do. Hope this helped somebody.